Alright, today we're going to talk about how to rotate figures on coordinate planes. We're going to focus on some notes that we need to take for it, and then I'm going to teach you guys a strategy on creating the rule for the rotation. So to begin, we have to pay attention to the directions we're given, which they're going to give you a certain amount of degrees, which we're going to translate into how many turns we need to make when we rotate. So if they say 0 degrees, you're not turning at all. You're going to stay exactly where you are. If they say 90 degrees, that's going to be 1 turn. 180 is going to be 2 turns. I think you can kind of catch on to the pattern here. Add another 90, it's going to take you to 270, which is going to be 3 turns. And then finally, the 4th turn would take you right back to center, which is where you started. So 360 degrees and 0 degrees, you're not going to be turning at all. You're still going to be facing the exact same way. Now, we know how many times to turn, but we also have to know which direction. So your 2 options are going to be clockwise or counterclockwise. So for clockwise, if you think about a clock, 12, 3, 6, and 9, clockwise would move generally how the hands on a clock would move. They're going to turn around this way. Counterclockwise is going to move in the opposite direction of the hands of a clock. So they're going to move back this way. So the 2 things you need to know when you're doing rotations is how many turns and which way am I turning. So those are going to be your rules based on what direction you're given. The next piece is going to be how to actually generate rules for these rotations. So to do that, I'm going to use this. I look at my x and y axis. My positive x's are on the right, my negative x's are on the left, my positive y's are on the top, and my negative y's are on the bottom. Now I use this note card to create all of my rotations. So let's say I had a rotation and I was going to rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Based off of our notes we just took, clockwise is going to move us around like this way, like this. And then 90 degrees is going to move us 1 turn. So I'm going to do 1 turn, and I'm going to move this direction. Now I'm going to just make up a random point. I'm going to start with point A, which will be 3, -1, just because I made those up. And I am going to rotate to get point A prime. Now, when I do the rotation, I'm going to go back to my note card here. I am going to take my note card and I am going to rotate it 1 turn clockwise. So now the orientation of my note card has changed. Now, when we write rules for rotations, we're always going to start with some x and y value. And then we've got to figure out how we're supposed to change them. Well, if I look at my note card normally, my x is on the right and my y is on the top. But if I've turned this, I now have something new on the right and something new on the top. Those are the 2 values that I need to record for my rule, because as I rotated this 90 clockwise, 1 turn, my new x, meaning it's not a positive x on the right anymore, it's now a positive y. And instead of a positive y being on the top, it's now a negative x. So that is me generating a rule for a 90 degrees clockwise rotation. Now you can memorize these, but I tend to forget, so I always go back to the note card and I just generate the rule each time because it's pretty quick. Now what's special about rotations is when you are looking at these rules, you're going to notice there's always going to be 2 changes. So rotations change two things. In this case, the first change is that x and y traded places. The second change is that the x value had to change sign. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is students will see this negative and they think, oh my gosh, all the x's become negative. Well, that's not always going to be the case. Think of this as it's just changing sign. So that means my y that used to be in the back needs to change places to the front. My x that used to be in the front needs to change places to the back, but it also has to change sign. Since it used to be a positive 3, it now becomes a negative 3. So I now have my new point A prime, and I have my algebraic expression or rule for my rotation. Okay, let's go ahead and practice another one. This time, let's do a 270 degree clockwise. So if we go back to our chart, 270 degrees was 3 turns. And clockwise is going to move like a clock. Now I'm going to use the same coordinate we did on our last example, but I'm going to apply a new rotational rule to do it. So from here, I'm going to take a look at this. Again, I'm doing 3 turns clockwise. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns. So that is 3 turns clockwise. Instead of having x and y on the right and on the top, on the right side I now have a negative y instead of a positive x, and instead of a positive y on the top, I now have a positive x on the top. So again, there's 2 changes. We have switching places, but we also have one value changing sign. So my x that used to be in the front now moves to the back, but nothing changes. Now my y that used to be in the back gets moved to the front, but it also has to change sign. So it used to be a negative 1, it now becomes a positive 1. So I have my new translated point A prime, but I also have the rule that I just generated for this rotation. Okay, we'll go ahead and do one more practice. This time we're going to look at 180 degrees counterclockwise. So 180 degrees is 2 turns, and counterclockwise moves opposite a clock. So I'm going to go the other direction. I'm going to work with the same point A, 3, -1, and rotate it to become A prime, my new coordinate. So we're going to go back to our note card here. I'm going to do 2 turns counterclockwise. So now I'm moving opposite a clock, moving the other way. 1 turn, 2 turns. Now we used to have x and y. X was on the right, y was on the top, but they're no longer in those positions. Now on the right I have negative x, and on the top I have negative y. Now this was different than the last ones, but you'll notice we still have 2 changes. Instead of them switching places, x changed sign and y changed sign. So every 180 rule is going to operate that way. My positive 3 becomes negative, my negative 1 becomes positive, and there is your new point after the rotation and your algebraic expression for the rotation. From here you could go ahead and plot points if you needed to create a new figure, but these are always the steps that I take for generating rotations.